December 7, 1939, Salla, Arctic, Finland. Captain Erkki Raappana, 34, from Oulu, pressed binoculars against frozen metal. His breath crystallized instantly at -35°C. Through the scope, Soviet infantry emerged from birch forests like ants spilling from a disturbed nest. Raappana's fingers ached inside wool mittens. The leather grip of his Suomi submachine gun had cracked in the cold. Around him, 135 Finnish soldiers occupied positions dug into permafrost. Each man knew the mathematics. Soviet 122nd Rifle Division had crossed the border 48 hours earlier. Intelligence reported 23,000 troops advancing through 3 corridors. Could 5,000 Finnish defenders stop them? The Soviet formations moved with industrial confidence. Columns stretched 3 kilometers deep. Trucks hauled artillery pieces that outweighed anything Finland possessed. Tank engines roared across frozen lakes. Red Army planners had designed this offensive to crush resistance within 5 days. Staff officers in Moscow had already drafted victory announcements. What Soviet commanders didn't know, within 3 weeks, their entire division would cease to exist as a fighting force. Raappana lowered the binoculars. His battalion held the southern approach to Salla village. Behind him lay supply depots, field hospitals, and the main road to Kemijärvi. If this line collapsed, Soviet armor would pour into central Finland unopposed. The stakes compressed into simple arithmetic: hold or die. There existed no third option. The temperature had dropped throughout the morning. Weapons malfunctioned in the cold. Bolt actions froze solid. Machine guns seized after 3-round bursts. Finnish troops had learned to urinate on frozen mechanisms to thaw them. Soviet forces, equipped for European warfare, suffered worse. Their cotton uniforms provided minimal insulation. Frostbite casualties mounted before combat began. Lieutenant Väinö Mäkinen, 28, from Tampere, skied between positions. He carried orders from battalion headquarters. His face showed no expression behind wool wrappings. Mäkinen had fought in the Civil War. He understood how terrain killed armies. The forests around Salla contained natural kill zones, narrow roads, frozen marshes, limited sight lines. The Soviets advanced in parade formation. Soviet 122nd Division represented standard Red Army doctrine: mass, firepower, overwhelming numbers. Political commissars had promised troops an easy campaign. Finnish reactionaries would collapse under proletarian pressure. Officers distributed propaganda leaflets showing liberated Finnish workers welcoming Soviet tanks. The operation plan allocated 4 days for breakthrough, 3 days for exploitation. The numbers seemed impossible. 23,000 attackers against 5,000 defenders across 80 kilometers of front. But Finnish military intelligence had confirmed every detail through border reconnaissance and radio intercepts. Raappana assembled his company, commanders, at 1100 hours. They gathered in a dugout carved from frozen earth. A single candle provided light. Maps showed Soviet advance routes marked in red pencil. Finnish positions appeared as thin blue lines. "They'll hit us at 3 points," Raappana said. His voice carried no emotion. Main thrust down the Markkajärvi road. Secondary attacks from north and south. "When?" asked Sergeant Toivo Laaksonen, 41, from Rovaniemi. "Today. Maybe tomorrow." "They're consolidating now." The sergeant studied the maps. Each understood the tactical problem. Soviet doctrine emphasized breakthrough, followed by rapid exploitation. Once they penetrated the defensive line, their superior numbers would roll up Finnish positions from the flanks. Traditional defense would fail. Mäkinen pointed to terrain features. "The forest narrows here, and here, roads become choke points." Raappana nodded. "We let them in, then we cut them off." The plan violated every principle of defensive warfare. Instead of holding static lines, Finnish forces would allow Soviet columns to advance deep into the forest. Small units would then attack supply lines, isolate advance elements, and destroy them piecemeal. It required perfect timing and iron discipline, but the alternative was annihilation. Soviet artillery opened fire at 13:47 hours. Shells screamed overhead and detonated in empty forest. The barrage lasted 40 minutes. It consumed thousands of rounds and accomplished nothing. Finnish positions sat kilometers from impact zones. Soviet forward observers, unfamiliar with Arctic terrain, had misidentified landmarks. When the barrage lifted, Soviet infantry advanced. They moved in dense formations, 3 ranks deep. Officers walked behind their troops. Political commissars shouted encouragement. The column stretched 2 kilometers along the Markkajärvi road. Raappana watched them come. His forward observers counted battalion after battalion. The Soviets expected resistance at the border. They found nothing. Confidence grew with each kilometer. By 1500 hours, lead elements had penetrated 8 kilometers into Finnish territory. They were walking into a trap. Finnish ski troops shadowed the Soviet advance from forest flanks. They moved silently through deep snow. White winter camouflage made them invisible against frozen landscape. Each squad carried specific orders. Do not engage. Mark positions. Wait for signal. The Soviet column continued forward. Officers consulted maps and declared progress ahead of schedule. By nightfall, they had advanced 15 kilometers. Battalion commanders established defensive positions and waited for dawn. Soviet intelligence had documented Finland's military weakness in extensive reports. The Red Army possessed numerical superiority of 4-1 in this sector. Finnish forces lacked heavy weapons, armor, and air support. Victory calculations appeared mathematically certain. The problem, those calculations assumed conventional warfare. Night brought temperatures below -40. Soviet troops huddled around campfires that revealed their positions for kilometers. They had not trained for Arctic conditions. Standard doctrine called for defensive perimeters, but frozen ground prevented proper entrenchment. Sentries stamped their feet and counted minutes until relief. At 02:30 hours, Finnish ski troops struck. They came from 3 directions simultaneously. White-clad figures emerged from darkness and unleashed concentrated fire. Suomi submachine guns emptied 71-round drums into Soviet positions. Grenades detonated among supply trucks. Within 5 minutes, the attack ceased. Finnish troops vanished back into forest before Soviet forces could organize counterattacks. The raids achieved 2 objectives. They inflicted casualties and destroyed sleep. Soviet troops remained awake, weapons ready, nerves stretched. When dawn arrived, they had not rested. Officers struggled to maintain discipline among exhausted soldiers. Could the Finns sustain this pressure? Soviet commanders believed guerrilla tactics represented desperation rather than strategy. December 8th brought clear skies and brutal cold. Soviet forces resumed their advance at first light. They moved more cautiously now. Flanking patrols probed forest approaches. The column compressed, units bunching together for mutual support. Progress slowed to 3 kilometers per hour. Raappana monitored reports from forward observers. The Soviets were behaving exactly as predicted. Fear made them cluster together. Clusters created targets. At 11:20 hours, the Soviet column entered the Markkajärvi defile. The road narrowed to 4 meters, hemmed by dense forest and frozen marsh. Vehicles could not maneuver off the packed surface. The lead battalion stretched across 2 kilometers of restricted terrain. Finnish machine gun positions opened fire simultaneously. Weapons concealed in forest undergrowth targeted the column from both flanks. Soviet troops dove for cover that didn't exist. Return fire hit only trees. Officers screamed orders that accomplished nothing. The killing lasted 17 minutes. When Finnish guns fell silent, 300 Soviet soldiers lay dead or dying. Survivors abandoned equipment and retreated down the road. They left behind trucks, artillery pieces, and ammunition wagons. Soviet divisional commander Colonel Ivan Sharov received reports at his headquarters 20 kilometers behind the front. The numbers confused him. How could 300 casualties result from a small unit ambush? His staff officers proposed explanations. Finnish strength had been underestimated. Enemy positions were more extensive than intelligence suggested. Sharov ordered a deliberate assault. Artillery would suppress Finnish positions. Infantry would advance under supporting fire. Tanks would lead the breakthrough. Standard doctrine applied to abnormal terrain. The assault began at 1600 hours. Soviet artillery pounded forest coordinates for 30 minutes. Shells defoliated trees and carved craters in permafrost. Infantry advanced behind the barrage in textbook formation. They expected to find destroyed Finnish positions. They found nothing. Finnish defenders had withdrawn before the bombardment. They occupied new positions 400 meters from the impact zone. When Soviet infantry entered the kill zone, Finnish machine guns opened fire from unexpected directions. The assault collapsed within minutes. That single ambush multiplied across the battlefield. Within 72 hours, 3 Soviet battalions became isolated and surrounded. The entire northern approach to Salla had become a graveyard. Lieutenant Colonel Paavo Talvela, 42 from Helsinki, commanded Finnish forces in the Salla sector. He had studied Soviet doctrine for 2 decades. His analysis identified critical vulnerabilities. Red Army units operated with rigid command structures. Junior officers lacked initiative. Troops depended on centralized logistics. Break their supply lines, and the entire formation would collapse. Talvela's solution violated conventional military wisdom. Instead of defending forward positions, Finnish forces would trade space for time. They would allow Soviet penetration, then isolate and destroy enemy formations through mobility and superior fieldcraft. The strategy required soldiers who could operate independently in extreme conditions. Finland possessed exactly that. What made Finnish troops uniquely capable? Every soldier had grown up in Arctic conditions. They skied before they walked. They hunted in forests, where visibility extended 5 meters. They understood how cold killed, how terrain channeled movement, how darkness provided advantage rather than obstacle. Talvela organized his forces into independent battle groups called sissi units. Each consisted of 200-300 men equipped with skis, white camouflage, and Suomi submachine guns. These units received mission-type orders: destroy enemy logistics, ambush isolated elements, avoid decisive engagement. They operated without supply lines, living off what they carried and what they captured. The transformation required 3 elements. First, absolute knowledge of local terrain. Finnish troops had trained in these forests since childhood. They knew every trail, every frozen lake, every concealed approach. Second, winter mobility. Soviet forces moved on roads. Finnish ski troops traveled cross-country at speeds Soviet soldiers couldn't match. Third, tactical flexibility. Each sissi unit operated semi-autonomously, responding to opportunities rather than fixed plans. How did this work in practice? Traditional defensive doctrine called for continuous lines and interlocking fields of fire. Talvela's approach created a defensive web with no front line. Soviet forces would advance along roads, believing they had achieved breakthrough. Behind them, Finnish units would cut supply routes and attack rear echelons. Isolated Soviet battalions would face encirclement without support. The advantage came from mobility differential. Finnish ski troops covered 40 kilometers per night through deep snow. Soviet infantry managed 15 kilometers per day on roads. This speed difference allowed Finnish forces to attack, withdraw, and attack again before Soviet commanders could respond. By the time reinforcements arrived, Finnish troops had vanished into forest. Before December 1939, Finnish military doctrine emphasized static defense, bunkers, trenches, artillery support. The Mannerheim Line represented this thinking. After Salla, everything changed. Speed replaced firepower. Mobility replaced mass. Individual initiative replaced centralized control. Soviet Colonel Sharov opposed this new approach with increasing desperation. He ordered units to maintain tight formation. He demanded constant radio communication. He prohibited independent action by battalion commanders. Every decision required headquarters approval. These orders guaranteed disaster. December 9th brought the first major test. Soviet 1662nd Rifle Regiment advanced down the Hautajärvi Road toward Salla village. The formation included 2,800 infantry, 12 artillery pieces, and 8 T-26 tanks. Staff officers projected arrival at Salla by evening. Captain Raappana's battle group shadowed the advance. His 250 men moved parallel to the Soviet column, remaining 500 meters inside the forest. They observed without attacking. Raappana waited for the optimal moment. At 1400 hours, the Soviet column stretched across 8 kilometers. Lead elements had separated from support units. Supply trucks lagged behind combat formations. The regiment had become a segmented snake, vulnerable at multiple points. Raappana struck the center. His ski troops emerged from forest and attacked supply vehicles. Machine gun fire disabled trucks and killed draft horses. Within minutes, the road became blocked with burning wreckage. Soviet forces ahead of the attack could not retreat. Forces behind could not advance. The regiment split into isolated segments. Finnish doctrine called this tactic motti, a Finnish word for the bundle of logs a farmer cuts. Just as logs are divided into manageable pieces, large enemy formations would be cut into smaller pockets that could be destroyed individually. The concept required patience, surround, isolate, wait for cold and hunger to weaken resistance, then annihilate. Soviet commanders recognized the danger too late. Colonel Sharov ordered 602nd Regiment to consolidate and break through the roadblock. His orders arrived 6 hours after the attack. By then, Finnish forces had established positions covering all approach routes. Soviet attempts to clear the road failed under concentrated fire. That night, temperatures dropped to -43. Soviet troops huddled in defensive positions. They had not prepared for extended operations in these conditions. Rations froze solid. Water bottles became ice blocks. Frostbite disabled more soldiers than combat. While Soviet forces suffered, Finnish troops thrived. They moved constantly, preventing cold from penetrating. They melted snow for water. They knew which tree bark provided emergency nutrition. Their white winter gear made them invisible. Their mobility made them untouchable. The contrast became lethal. Numerical shock proved decisive. In 3 days, Soviet 602nd Regiment lost 1,800 men without achieving a single tactical objective. Finnish casualties totaled 43 dead and 67 wounded. Opposition to Talvela's methods came from unexpected sources. Some Finnish commanders argued for conventional defense. They wanted fixed positions and continuous lines. They believed guerrilla tactics demonstrated weakness rather than sophistication. Major Arne Sivo, 38, from Turku, commanded artillery units in the sector. He demanded Talvela concentrate forces for a decisive battle. "We're fighting like bandits," Sivo complained during a command meeting on December 11th. "Give me infantry support and I'll break their advance." Talvela refused. "Your artillery would be effective for one engagement, then you'd be surrounded and destroyed. We win by not fighting their kind of war." The debate continued through the winter. Traditional officers struggled to accept tactics that violated their training. They wanted maps with clear front lines. They wanted set-piece battles with defined outcomes. They got neither. Talvela's approach required different metrics. Success measured not by ground held, but by enemy forces destroyed. Victory came not from breakthrough, but from attrition. The strategy demanded patience that military culture resisted. December 12th demonstrated why Talvela was correct. Soviet 81st Rifle Regiment attempted to relieve surrounded units. They advanced with 3,200 troops in column formation. Finnish observers reported the movement. Talvela deployed 2 sissi units, totaling 500 men. The Finnish troops did not attempt to stop the Soviet advance. Instead, They attacked the column's flanks while it moved. Hit, withdraw, reposition, hit again. Soviet officers could not identify attacker strength or location. Return fire accomplished nothing. The harassment continued for 18 hours. By the time 81st Regiment reached the objective, it had lost 600 men and most of its ammunition. The exhausted survivors lacked combat effectiveness. They became another isolated pocket requiring relief. How effective was this approach? Soviet military archives later confirmed that between December 7th and December 31st, their 122nd Rifle Division lost 11,000 troops without achieving a single operational objective. The division ceased to exist as a cohesive fighting force. What remained were scattered units, trapped in shrinking defensive perimeters, waiting for supplies that never arrived and relief that never came. Finnish forces refined their tactics through brutal trial. Each engagement revealed new techniques. Each failure taught necessary lessons. The learning curve operated at combat speed. December 13th brought the first major adjustment. Captain Mauno Otonen, 31 from Kuopio, commanded a sissi unit operating north of the Markkajärvi Road. His 180 men had ambushed a Soviet supply convoy, destroying 6 trucks and capturing ammunition. The success created a problem. Soviet forces responded with overwhelming firepower. Artillery saturated the ambush site. Infantry companies converged from 3 directions. Otonen's unit escaped, but the close call demonstrated a critical lesson. Hit too hard and the enemy would mass forces to crush you. The solution required calibration. Finnish attacks needed to inflict damage while avoiding decisive engagement. Wound the enemy without provoking overwhelming response. It was a delicate balance. Otonen adjusted his tactics. Instead of destroying entire convoys, his unit would disable lead and trail vehicles. This trapped the convoy without eliminating it completely. Soviet forces would commit resources to recovery rather than pursuit. Finnish troops could attack again when the enemy relaxed. How many attacks could they sustain? Within 10 days, Otonen's unit conducted 23 separate raids along a 40-kilometer stretch of road. Lieutenant Eero Jokinen, 26 from Lahti, discovered another refinement on December 15th. His unit had been shadowing Soviet forces near Lake Kuolajärvi. Intelligence reported the Soviets were moving at night to avoid Finnish observation. Jokinen adapted immediately. He positioned his troops along likely routes and waited in darkness. When Soviet columns approached, Finnish soldiers allowed them to pass. Then they attacked from behind, targeting rear elements. The Soviets marching forward took minutes to organize response. By then, Finnish troops had vanished. Night ambush became standard procedure. The technique required absolute noise discipline. Soldiers wrapped equipment to prevent metallic sounds. They marked routes in advance. They rehearsed movements until they could execute them in complete darkness. Soviet forces, dependent on visual coordination, could not match this capability. December 17th tested a different approach. Captain Vilho Nenonen, 33 from Pori, commanded a sissi unit near Salatunturi fell. His orders called for disrupting Soviet communications. Nenonen had to determine how, without engaging in direct combat. His solution demonstrated creativity. Finnish troops infiltrated behind Soviet lines at night. They cut telephone wires connecting forward units to headquarters. They didn't destroy the lines completely, just created intermittent failures that generated confusion. Soviet signals officers spent days diagnosing phantom problems. Meanwhile, critical communications failed at decisive moments. Orders arrived late or not at all. Commanders operated with outdated information. The chaos multiplied across the entire division. Each unit contributed innovations. Sergeant Laaksonen developed techniques for approaching Soviet positions undetected. He studied enemy sentry patterns and identified gaps in coverage. His methods allowed Finnish scouts to penetrate defensive perimeters and gather intelligence without firing a shot. Lieutenant Makinen pioneered the use of captured Soviet equipment. Finnish forces seized weapons, uniforms, and supplies from destroyed convoys. They used these items to confuse enemy identification. Soviet sentries hesitated when encountering troops in Red Army greatcoats. That hesitation cost seconds. Seconds cost lives. While Soviet forces retreated inward, Finnish tactics expanded outward. What began as simple ambushes evolved into complex operations coordinating multiple units across wide frontages. By December 20th, Talvela commanded a sophisticated tactical system. Intelligence networks tracked Soviet movements. Radio communications coordinated sissi units. Supply lines delivered ammunition and food to forces operating 30 kilometers behind enemy positions. The entire operation functioned like a precision mechanism. Soviet responses became predictable. When ambushed, they would deploy in defensive formation and wait for reinforcement. Finnish troops learned to exploit this pattern. Attack, withdraw, allow the Soviets to establish defensive positions, then attack their supply line, forcing them to either retreat or starve. The trapped Soviet units faced impossible choices: remain stationary and die slowly from cold and hunger, attempt breakout and die quickly from Finnish ambush. Every option led to destruction. Captain Raappana observed these developments with grim satisfaction. His original battalion of 135 men had grown to a battle group of 400 through reinforcements and attached units. They had conducted 47 separate engagements without losing control of their operational area. Soviet forces had advanced 20 kilometers into Finnish territory and gotten stuck. Would the Soviets learn? Intelligence suggested they were attempting new tactics. December 22nd brought evidence of Soviet adaptation. A reinforced regiment approached from the east using dispersed formation. Instead of column, they advanced on a broad front with units separated by 500 meters. The formation prevented Finnish forces from achieving devastating ambushes. Lieutenant Colonel Talvela studied the reports. "They're learning," he told his staff officers. "We need to learn faster." Finnish forces adjusted within 24 hours. If Soviet units dispersed, Finnish troops would concentrate. Instead of spreading forces across the front, Talvela would mass units to destroy individual Soviet battalions. Overwhelm one position. Withdraw before reinforcements arrived. Repeat. The new approach required precise timing. Finnish ski troops had to identify isolated Soviet units, mass forces for attack, overwhelm defenses, and withdraw, all within a few hours. It was logistically complex and tactically risky. December 24th tested the concept. Captain Otinen's battle group, reinforced to 650 troops, assaulted a Soviet battalion position at Korya. The attack began at 0400 hours with concentrated machine gun fire. Finnish troops advanced from 3 directions simultaneously. Soviet defenders, expecting harassment rather than assault, collapsed under pressure. The battle lasted 90 minutes. Finnish forces killed 380 Soviet troops and captured 8 artillery pieces. They withdrew before Soviet reinforcements arrived from positions 5 kilometers away. Total Finnish casualties: 22 wounded, none killed. The numbers seemed impossible. 380 enemy casualties inflicted by a force of 650 in 90 minutes. But captured Soviet documents confirmed every detail. That Christmas Eve engagement demonstrated tactical maturity. Finnish forces had progressed from defensive ambushes to offensive operations. They could concentrate, attack, and disperse with speed that Soviet forces could not match. The hunter had become the predator. Soviet Colonel Sherov recognized the shift. His division had lost combat effectiveness. Units reported strength at 60%. Morale collapsed. Frostbite and illness disabled thousands. Supply lines existed only on paper. His requests for reinforcement received no response. Moscow headquarters had already written off 122nd Division. December 27th brought the final refinement. Finnish forces began coordinating attacks across the entire sector. While one unit ambushed Soviet supply lines in the north, another would assault defensive positions in the south. While a third created diversions in the center, A fourth would infiltrate behind lines to attack headquarters elements. The Soviets could not defend everywhere simultaneously. Their limited mobility prevented rapid reinforcement. Each attack forced them to commit reserves. When reserves deployed, other sectors became vulnerable. Finnish operations created a cascading failure across the Soviet defensive system. The weather aided Finnish success. Temperatures remained below -40 throughout late December. Soviet troops, equipped for temperate warfare, suffered catastrophic cold weather casualties. Entire companies became non-functional due to frostbite. Officers could not maintain discipline among men whose primary concern was survival rather than combat. Finnish troops exploited this weakness systematically. They attacked at dawn when cold was most severe. They targeted Soviet units as they attempted to prepare morning meals. They forced the enemy to choose between fighting and freezing. How long could this continue? Soviet forces controlled only the ground beneath their feet. Everything else belonged to Finnish ski troops who moved through forests like ghosts, white-clad, silent, lethal. Lieutenant Makinen detected movement through his binoculars at first light on December 29. Soviet forces were withdrawing from advanced positions. The column stretched 2 kilometers, troops moving in exhausted shuffle rather than military formation. They abandoned equipment too heavy to carry. Trucks sat empty, fuel frozen in their tanks. Makinen signaled his unit forward. His 90 ski troops paralleled the Soviet retreat, remaining inside forest shadows. They moved faster than the enemy, positioning themselves 3 kilometers ahead of the column. Then they waited. Could the Soviets reach safety? The nearest Soviet-held position lay 15 kilometers back along the road. At 0840 hours, the Soviet column entered a narrow defile between Lake Kyantajärvi and dense forest. The road compressed to 3 meters width. Soldiers bunched together, seeking mutual protection. Officers shouted orders that no one followed. Finnish machine guns opened fire simultaneously from both flanks. The opening burst killed the lead Soviet platoon. Troops behind them pressed forward, trapped by their own numbers. Return fire hit trees and empty air. Finnish positions, concealed in snowdrifts and underbrush, remained invisible. The ambush lasted 14 minutes. When Finnish guns ceased, 240 Soviet soldiers lay dead or dying. Survivors scattered into forest without weapons or supplies. Most would freeze before nightfall. Makinen's unit withdrew immediately. They skied north, weapons slung, covering 6 kilometers in 35 minutes. By the time Soviet reinforcements arrived at the ambush site, Finnish troops had vanished completely. The only evidence of their presence came from empty shell casings and blood-soaked snow. That morning brought similar results across the entire sector. Finnish forces destroyed 3 separate Soviet withdrawal attempts. Each ambush followed the same pattern. Allow the enemy to commit to movement, strike at the moment of maximum vulnerability, inflict casualties, withdraw before reinforcement arrives. Soviet commanders faced an operational nightmare. They could not hold current positions due to supply failures. They could not withdraw due to Finnish interdiction. They could not advance due to terrain and weather. Every option led to greater losses. December 30th revealed the depth of Soviet disaster. Captain Raappana's reconnaissance teams discovered an entire Soviet regiment trapped at Markajärvi. The 81st Rifle Regiment had occupied defensive positions 3 weeks earlier. Now they sat immobile, surrounded by Finnish forces, with supplies exhausted and temperatures dropping below -45. Raappana reported the situation to Talvela. They're finished. No food, no ammunition. Half the regiment has frostbite. They're eating leather and tree bark. Under cover of darkness, Finnish forces tightened their encirclement. They moved machine gun positions closer to Soviet lines. They established observation posts covering every approach. They prepared for the final assault. What choice would the Soviets make? Surrender was not part of Red Army doctrine. Officers feared execution more than combat death. The trapped regiment would fight until completely destroyed. January 2nd, 1940 brought clear skies and visibility extending kilometers. Finnish artillery, carefully conserved throughout the campaign, moved into position. 4 76mm guns and 6 mortars targeted the Soviet perimeter. At 0600 hours, they opened fire. The bombardment lasted 20 minutes. Shells detonated among Soviet positions with methodical precision. Finnish forward observers adjusted fire in real time, ensuring maximum effect. When guns fell silent, Finnish infantry advanced. The assault encountered minimal resistance. Soviet troops, weakened by cold and hunger, could barely hold weapons. Many surrendered immediately. Others attempted to flee and died within meters. By 0800 hours, the battle had ended. Finnish forces counted 1,680 Soviet dead and captured 340 survivors. They seized 18 artillery pieces, 47 machine guns, and 1,200 rifles. Total Finnish casualties in the assault: 9 killed, 23 wounded. How many more Soviet pockets remained? Intelligence identified at least 4 separate encirclements, ranging from company to regiment strength. While Raappana's forces destroyed 81st Regiment, Captain Otonin engaged Soviet forces attempting to break through from the north. His battle group occupied positions covering the Salla-Kemijärvi road. Soviet 438th Rifle Regiment, attempting to evacuate, advanced with 1,800 troops in 2 parallel columns. Otonin split his 400 men into 3 groups. One blocked the road directly, one flanked from the east, one remained in reserve. The trap closed when Soviet advance elements encountered the roadblock. Finnish troops on the flanks attacked simultaneously. Machine gun fire swept Soviet formations. Mortar rounds detonated among packed troops. The assault continued for 35 minutes. Of sustained violence, Soviet forces attempted to form defensive perimeter, but lacked space to maneuver. The road prevented deployment. Forest prevented withdrawal. They were trapped in a killing zone with no escape. By noon, 438th Regiment had ceased to exist. Finnish troops counted 980 Soviet dead. They captured 240 prisoners, mostly wounded. The remainder scattered into forest, where cold claimed them within hours. That afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel Talvela assembled his commanders at forward headquarters. Maps showed the tactical situation in stark clarity. Soviet 122nd Division had disintegrated. Of 23,000 troops that crossed the border on December 7th, fewer than 8,000 remained combat effective. Most were trapped in isolated pockets. Those still mobile were retreating toward the Soviet border. "We've won," Talvela announced. His voice carried no triumph. "But the war continues. Don't celebrate yet." He was correct. Soviet High Command was already planning renewed offensives with fresh divisions. But at Salla, in late December 1939, outnumbered Finnish force had achieved what military theorists considered impossible. January 5th brought the final major engagement. Soviet forces mounted a desperate relief attempt. 3 battalions advanced toward trapped units at Korea. The formation included 2,400 infantry, supported by 14 tanks and artillery. Soviet commanders believed overwhelming firepower would break Finnish positions. They miscalculated fatally. Finnish forces allowed the Soviet advance to penetrate 8 kilometers. Then they attacked supply lines, destroying fuel trucks and ammunition wagons. Soviet tanks, running dry, became immobile pillboxes. Infantry units, cut off from support, found themselves isolated in hostile territory. The battle developed into multiple separate engagements. Each Soviet battalion fought independently. No coordination existed between units. Finnish forces exploited gaps in Soviet formations, moving freely between pockets and striking at will. By January 7th, all 3 Soviet battalions had been destroyed or captured. The relief attempt achieved the nothing except adding 1,400 casualties to division losses. Throughout these engagements, Finnish troops maintained operational discipline. They avoided unnecessary risks. They conserved ammunition. They evacuated wounded efficiently. Their casualty rates remained remarkably low, considering the intensity of combat. Soviet forces, by contrast, suffered catastrophic losses from both combat and environmental factors. Cold weather injuries exceeded battle casualties. Frostbite disabled thousands. Hypothermia killed hundreds. The combination of Finnish harassment and Arctic conditions created a humanitarian disaster for Soviet troops. What did captured Soviet soldiers reveal? Interviews conducted by Finnish intelligence painted a picture of complete breakdown. Units lacked food for days. Officers could not communicate with headquarters. Orders arrived hours late or contradicted previous instructions. Morale collapsed. Discipline evaporated. Soldiers focused solely on survival. January 10th marked the operational conclusion of the Battle of Salla. Soviet forces still held small pockets, but posed no offensive threat. Finnish troops controlled all major roads and terrain features. The 122nd Rifle Division existed only as name on Soviet order of battle. Its combat power had been annihilated. Final sweep operations continued through mid-January. Finnish forces systematically reduced remaining Soviet pockets. Some surrendered, others fought until destroyed. Few escaped back across the border. The weather remained brutal throughout. Temperatures fluctuated between -35 and -50. Clear skies alternated with blizzards. The environment killed as efficiently as bullets. Finnish troops adapted to these conditions, continued operations. Soviet forces, unprepared and demoralized, suffered exponentially. During 31 days of combat, Finnish forces in the Salla sector destroyed Soviet 122nd Rifle Division as a functional military unit. Of 23,000 Soviet troops that crossed the border, approximately 6,000 survived to retreat. Finnish forces inflicted roughly 17,000 casualties through combination of combat action and environmental factors. This represented a 74% casualty rate for the attacking force. Finnish casualties totaled approximately 400 killed and 800 wounded, a ratio of roughly 121 in killed alone. These numbers seemed impossible by conventional military standards. But Soviet archives, opened after 1991, confirmed the scale of disaster. The 122nd Rifle Division was effectively destroyed and required complete reconstitution. The tactical success at Salla multiplied into strategic consequences that reshaped the entire Winter War. Soviet High Command had planned rapid breakthrough, followed by exploitation deep into Finland. The destruction of 122nd Division prevented this completely. Instead of advancing 100 kilometers in 1 week, Soviet forces gained 20 kilometers in 1 month and couldn't hold that. This failure forced Soviet strategic recalculation. Original plans called for simultaneous breakthroughs at multiple points along the Finnish border. Success at one location would force Finnish retreat across the entire front. The Salla disaster demonstrated this assumption was false. Finnish forces could destroy Soviet divisions, even when heavily outnumbered. That single tactical victory generated operational pause. Soviet commanders halted offensive operations across multiple sectors while reassessing their approach. This delay gave Finnish forces time to consolidate defenses, redistribute forces, and prepare for renewed attacks. The breathing space proved strategically vital. Beyond immediate military impact, the Battle of Salla revealed fundamental flaws in Soviet military doctrine. Red Army planning assumed numerical superiority guaranteed victory. It assumed enemy forces would fight conventionally. It assumed Arctic conditions affected both sides equally. All three assumptions proved catastrophically wrong. The battle demonstrated that mobility could defeat mass, that terrain expertise could overcome numerical inferiority, that adaptation could triumph over doctrine. These lessons influenced military thinking far beyond Finland's borders. What made 5,000 Finnish troops capable of destroying 23,000 Soviet attackers? The answer combined multiple factors into a unique tactical system. Environmental adaptation allowed Finnish forces to operate effectively in conditions that crippled Soviet units. Superior mobility provided tactical advantage that numbers couldn't overcome. Decentralized command enabled rapid response to changing situations. The combination proved lethal. Post-war military analysis identified the Battle of Salla as a case study in asymmetric warfare. Smaller forces, properly trained and led, could defeat numerically superior enemies through exploitation of terrain. Weather, an enemy weakness. This concept influenced military doctrine in multiple nations. American military planners studied Salla extensively during the 1950s and 1960s. The battle provided lessons for potential combat in Arctic and mountain environments. Soviet recognition of mobility and environmental factors in modern warfare came partly from painful lessons learned in Finnish forests. Modern special operations doctrine traces partial lineage to Finnish tactics at Salla. Small units, independent operations, mission-type orders, exploitation of enemy weakness. These principles, proven effective in 1939, remain relevant in contemporary military thinking. The battle influenced weapons development. Finnish success with Suomi submachine guns demonstrated the value of automatic weapons in close-quarters forest combat. Soviet forces, primarily equipped with bolt-action rifles, could not match Finnish firepower in ambush situations. Post-war emphasis on submachine guns and assault rifles reflected lessons learned. Winter warfare training in multiple militaries incorporates techniques pioneered by Finnish forces. Ski operations, white camouflage, cold weather survival. These capabilities demonstrated at Salla became standard components of military preparation for Arctic operations. What happened to the men who fought there? Lieutenant Colonel Paavo Talvela received promotion to colonel and commanded increasingly larger formations throughout the Winter War and Continuation War. He survived both conflicts and retired as Major General in 1944. He spent post-war years documenting Finnish tactical innovations for military audiences. Captain Erkki Raappana earned battlefield promotion to Major. He continued commanding combat units until war's end. Post-war, he taught at Finnish Military Academy, training new generations in tactics he had pioneered. He died in 1978 at age 73. Lieutenant Väinö Mäkinen survived the Winter War, only to fall during the Continuation War in 1942. He was leading a reconnaissance patrol when Soviet artillery found his position. He was 31. Captain Mauno Ottinen received wounds in January 1940 that ended his combat career. He recovered and served in training roles for the remainder of the war. Post-war, he wrote extensively about winter warfare tactics, becoming recognized authority on the subject. Sergeant Toivo Laaksonen, the 41-year-old veteran from Rovaniemi, survived the entire war. He returned to civilian life and worked as hunting guide in northern Finland. He rarely discussed his wartime service. He died in 1967. Soviet survivors faced different fates. Colonel Ivan Sharov was recalled to Moscow in January 1940. He faced court-martial for the division's destruction. His sentence, 10 years in labor camps. He died in 1943 in a Kolyma gold mine, another casualty of the Salla disaster. Junior Soviet officers who survived faced suspicion and investigation. Many received punishment for lacking offensive spirit. Some were executed, others disappeared into the Gulag system. Soviet military culture blamed commanders for failures that resulted from flawed strategy and inadequate preparation. The broader Soviet military establishment learned painful lessons. Within months, Red Army underwent massive tactical reforms. Training emphasized winter operations. Equipment was redesigned for Arctic conditions. Doctrine shifted to acknowledge terrain and mobility factors. The changes came too late for the Winter War, but influenced later operations. For Finland, Salla represented validation of irregular warfare concepts. The nation's geography and limited population made conventional defense impossible. But asymmetric tactics, exploiting terrain, and environmental factors provided viable strategy against numerically superior opponents. This approach shaped Finnish military doctrine for generations. The battle entered Finnish national consciousness as symbol of resilience and tactical brilliance. It demonstrated that determination and skill could overcome material disadvantage. This narrative, while somewhat romanticized, carried truth. At Salla, outgunned and outnumbered, Finnish forces achieved what conventional analysis deemed impossible. Modern visitors to Salla find little physical evidence of the 1939 battle. Forest has reclaimed old positions. Roads follow different routes. The landscape appears peaceful. But local museums preserve artifacts and memories, rusted weapons, faded photographs, oral histories from survivors. The tactical lessons remain relevant. In an era of precision weapons and technological warfare, Salla demonstrates enduring principles. Know your terrain. Exploit enemy weakness. Adapt faster than your opponent. Fight your kind of war, not theirs. Those Finnish soldiers, skiing through -40 darkness to ambush Soviet positions, understood these truths instinctively. They fought with weapons inferior to their enemies. They operated without air support or armor. They survived on limited supplies in brutal conditions. Yet they won decisively. Their fury came not from hatred, but from necessity. They defended their homeland against invasion. They protected their families and communities. They refused to accept defeat despite impossible odds. That determination, channeled through superior tactics and fieldcraft, destroyed an entire Soviet division. The Battle of Salla proved that courage and skill could triumph over numbers and firepower. Small forces could defeat large ones. Defense could become offense. The outnumbered could destroy the superior. These lessons, written in blood on frozen Finnish forest floor, remain valid today. In those dark December days of 1939, 5,000 Finnish troops demonstrated what professional soldiers could achieve when fighting for survival. They rewrote tactical doctrine through improvisation and excellence. They turned environmental disadvantage into weapon. They made mobility defeat mass. That achievement echoes across military history.